How do you define a mystery? To the good people of New Mexico and many others involved in the story you are about to hear, with one word: Roswell. As you will hear, Roswell has become synonymous with possibly one of the most important events of all time. But first, we're going to build a case for you, in its way as painstaking as any court case ever decided. It's the case for the amazing event and the extreme measures military authorities took to suppress it. As for any jury, you will take your time and attention to follow the evidence. You might find it difficult to follow at times, but it will become evident that one other word summarizes this entire event: cover-up. The case begins with our sketching of background. We have to return to an America 2 years after victory in her greatest war. We have to return to a time when the predicted post-war depression wasn't happening after all, when the last shreds of Eastern Europe's independence were being torn away and the Cold War got really chilly, when a single Paris fashion designer would decree all hemlines down, when city dwellers slept in parks to escape summer heat, and when the press had a real tradition of filling the hot weather news stories with hopes and fads and wonders. During the latter part of June and early July of 1947, newspapers throughout the country carried accounts describing the arrival of the flying saucers. Witnesses would describe from one corner of the country to the next flying discs, crescent-shaped objects, metallic, that defied conventional explanation. Military pilots were placed on 24-hour call. Radar operators were on 24-hour standby, all glancing upward, skyward, hoping that what was presently invading our airspace served no new threat. July 4th, a severe lightning storm in the central part of New Mexico. What's significant about New Mexico is that in 1947, it was probably the most sensitive, most highly guarded area of the world. Not only did you have ongoing atomic research at Los Alamos, but you had other rocket tests just to the south at White Sands in Alamogordo. And in Roswell itself, you had the headquarters of the 509th Heavy Bombardment Group. This was the unit who just 2 years before had dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Little did they know that they would also be involved in one of the most significant, most historic events of all time: the crash of an unknown object, late evening of July 4th, between 11 and 11:30, at the height of the storm, when an object was actually tracked on radar in a flash, and it would go off the screen. Local ranchers would describe hearing a loud explosion that didn't sound like the other thunderclaps at that time. Civilians would actually arrive at the site first. Some would attempt to report it to the local sheriff. Others would later describe what they saw, but they would wait many years before finally admitting it to their closest family members and friends. The facts that still defy all reasonable, conventional explanation, because as you are about to hear, these people believe that they actually recovered a flying saucer. Soon after sunrise on July 5th, a local rancher by the name of Mac Brazo, riding out through the particular ranch that he served as a foreman, just south of Corona, New Mexico in 1947, discovered a debris field that was so massive in the area it covered that by the very appearance of the material, it was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. A debris field that covered an area 3/4 of a mile long by a few hundred feet wide. He would get down from his horse and examine the material, and he had never seen anything like it before.
According to my dad, There was a bad thunderstorm the night before. The next day he was out on the ranch and he found this debris. And he picked it all up in his pickup and was talking to people, and of course there was some talk about UFOs. He was going to Roswell, and as far as I know, he got in touch with the sheriff's department. They in turn called the Air Force. Then the Air Force got with Dad and swore him to secrecy, and they came out to the ranch and picked up this debris. Wood, I call it wood, I don't know what it was. It was something like balsa wood, but it wouldn't burn, and I couldn't cut it with my knife.
He would then take some of the material and go to his nearest neighbors. Floyd and Loretta Proctor lived 10 miles from his ranch at that time. Loretta Proctor still lives at that same ranch and vividly recalls Mac Brazel bringing some of the material for her and her husband to examine.
The piece he brought up looked like a kind of a tan, light brown plastic is what it looked like. Because we have no plastic now. Back then we didn't have any plastic that I knew of. And then there was something he described as tape. He said kind of like a piece of tape that had printing on it. It wasn't writing as we knew it. It wasn't Japanese writing. You know, it suggested maybe that it might have been a Japanese book or something. He said the writing wasn't like Japanese writing, but it was, I imagine, more like hieroglyphics or something like that, the way he described it.
After receiving similar advice from other neighbors, Mac Brazel made the long trek down the Roswell. He there reported it to the Chavez County Sheriff, George Wilcox. Shortly thereafter, radio station reporter Frank Joyce from KGFL places a phone call to the sheriff's office. The sheriff suggests there's someone here I think you should talk to. Brazel then describes to Joyce the extent of the debris with both anger and fright, and Joyce suggests he reported to the 509th. It clearly was a military matter.
So I got a call from a man who, on the ranch, now once again we're going to get into something here. I don't try to go into details about what he said to me or what I believe he said, but he was reporting some wreckage, let's call it wreckage, on his ranch. And he asked me, and he was quite I guess I could say upset. He asked me what to do about it. And I recommended that he talk to all these. After listening to some of the things he was saying, he's saying certain things which I really would ordinarily be very skeptical about. You know, when you work at a radio station, a TV station, you get all sorts of calls from people, and some of them maybe a little strange. So I recommended, just generally speaking here, without trying to go into a lot of details, that he go to certain authorities. And I finally got him around to, I suggested that with whatever he was talking to me about, that he contact the Roswell Army Air Force Base. As I said, they're flyers. They'll know what to do about anything that flies.
One of the sheriff's daughters, Elizabeth Tulk, remembers the day the rancher brought the material to her father's office.
When we arrived, I noticed that there were jeeps and some people, you know, from the Air Force there. And of course I went right in with my small child, and my husband Jay went into the office and he said to my father, "What's going on, George?" And he said, "Well, we've had a man come in saying that there's a flying saucer and bringing a piece of things," and said, "I don't know what it is," and said, "We're investigating it." And he said, "What was it?" And he said, "Well, it looked like burnt grass out there." But as the years went along, Mother would always say, and I also know of an article that she wrote that said, we do not, as to this day, know that whether it was a flying saucer or what, because they told my husband, Mr. Wilcox, what she would say, don't you say a word. So he didn't, and he was very calm about it. I mean, he just didn't say anything.
Who told him not to say a word?
The Air Force did. When they came and picked up the piece or whatever they did, she said they reprimanded him. That's what the words were in the little article she wrote.
Another daughter, Phyllis McGuire, not only remembers the material, but also remembers two of the deputies being sent out to investigate the incident, and their reaction when they reported back to her father.
So you've read about this flying saucer incident in the newspaper. You went and talked to your father about it.
Asked him about it, and
What did he tell you?
and I asked him, do you think this is true? And he said, I don't know why Roswell would have come all the way in here and brought that stuff if it hadn't been something important, and that he it had to be something that he thought was that. And he had sent deputies out to see about it.
What happened? Did he say
And he
when
sent
we sent the deputies
and he
out?
sent the deputies out. And I'm of the opinion that he sent the deputies out once, and that they saw a large blackened area, the grass, the rangeland, and that they came back because it was dark. And then when they came back, he had to wait till the next day to send them back again to find something else. And when they went back again, the Army had blocked it off and didn't let them in.
After almost 50 years, it has become quite apparent by other family testimony that the sheriff, as well as his office, was involved to a much higher degree than anyone had ever suspected. One of the more frightening accounts, as described by his granddaughter, Barbara Duggar, suggests that the military went to most extreme measures to not only silence these people, but to ensure that they never talked about this event ever again.
One evening we were watching TV, and it was on TV there was something about space. And my grandmother looked over at me and she said, Barbara, do you believe in anything, outside of the earth? And I said, I do. And she said, well, I have something that I would really like to tell you, but I don't want you to ever discuss this or tell anyone because I've never told anybody. And I said, fine. What do you need to tell me? And she, I thought it was going to be something completely different than what she told me. And she said, in the 40s, there was a spacecraft, a flying saucer is what Big Mom called it, crashed outside of Roswell. And I said, that's interesting. I said, how do you know about it, Big Mom? And she said, your grandfather, George, was as a sheriff at the time. And I said, well, I didn't have any idea. I said, what more about it? And she was very hesitant to talk about it, but you knew that within her there was something that she really needed to tell me. She sat there for quite a while, and then she looked at me and she said, I'm just going to tell you. And she said, but don't tell anybody. And I said, who would I tell anyway? I don't know anybody to tell. And she said, the reason that I'm telling you this is because when the incident happened, the military police came to the courthouse, to the jailhouse, and told George and I that if we ever told anything about this incident, talked about it in any way, that not only we would be killed, but the family, that they would get the rest of the family.
She was there and witnessed the police, the military come in?
Yes, when she was standing there with my grandfather. I said, did you hear them say that, Big Mom? That's what I called her. And she said, yes, I did, Barbara. What happened is someone came and told my grandfather of this incident that had happened outside of Roswell. My grandmother stated that my grandfather went out there to the site When he got out there, there was a big burned area when they first approached the area. And then they saw debris. He saw debris. I don't know if he was alone. She was not with him. He went by himself. She said that it was kind of like in the evening. And then when he came back, I asked her, I said, out of jokingness, did he see any little space beings? And she said, yes, there was 4 of them. And I asked her, I said, what did they have on, Big Mom? And she said that they were like gray. And Granddaddy said their heads were large. And the little suit that they had on was just, you couldn't, it was just like silk or something, like that kind of material. But they were gray. And I asked her what happened after that, and she said he came back into town, and I guess they had discussed this incident, and they had thought it was fine to put it over the news, to talk about it, and then apparently something happened, and it was not okay. And when they knew that he had gone out there and seen the site, and seen this situation that they had talked about, Big Mom said that they were on him like you wouldn't believe. And they came into the jailhouse and told him, you don't say anything, George. And if you do, you'll die, and so will Inez and the children and those children. And I said, did you believe him? She said, what do you think?
Heeding the advice of reporter Frank Joyce, the sheriff would contact the local base. There, the intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, would receive the first information about the rancher's find. He, in the company of a counterintelligence officer, Captain Sheridan Cavett, would go to the sheriff's office, examine some of the material, and there, at the advice of the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, would follow the rancher back to the debris field.
I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a foil of a pack of cigarettes. It was that thin. One of my boys told me, he said, there's something unusual here. He said, I tried to make a dent in this metal, but he said, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He says, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it.
Having sent Cavett ahead to the base, Marcel would stop at his home, which was en route back to the base. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, July 8th. There he would rouse his wife and his son Jesse Jr., who was then 11 years old. They would go to the kitchen, where they would find the table as well as the floor, covered with this most unusual debris.
He had something he wanted to show us. This apparently was some debris or something he brought in from the field at that time, and I understand he was on his way to the air base to deliver this, but he felt that this was unusual enough that he wanted us to see it first before he delivered it to its proper destination.
And what happened? What happened after he woke you up?
Well, he was, as I recall, very excited, and again he said, "I want to show you something," and so I got my house coat on, as did my mother, and he had gone out to the car and brought back in some metallic debris. I believe it was in a box. I don't recall whether I walked outside with him or not, but he made it seem like the 1942 Buick we had was loaded with the stuff in the back seat and in the trunk area. At any rate, he brought the material in and spread it on the kitchen floor, and in an effort to try to piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle to get some idea of the form of this, but unfortunately there was too much of it, too finely divided to do that. There was a lot of rather thick foil-like material, kind of not a shiny aluminum, but burnished or a slate gray type of aluminum metal. There was black plastic type debris like bakelite, which was shattered. It was very brittle material. And then there were fragments of what appeared to be I-beams, relatively small, but the typical I-beam type configuration. The most unusual part of this whole thing was what was on the I-beam, on the inner surface of the I-beam. Because as you look at it, head-on, there appeared to be a type of writing on the mainframe itself. This writing was definitely a purplish violet hue. It did have an embossed appearance because you could, if I recall, you could rub your finger along it and you could tell it had texture. I don't recall seeing any lines or letters of any kind, but it was more like geometric shapes.
During mid-morning, July 8th, First Lieutenant Walter Hott, the public information officer at Roswell, received a strange phone call from the base commander, William Blanchard, ordering him to put out a press release describing the actual recovery of a flying saucer.
Got the telephone call from Colonel Blanchard, and in essence he told me that he had in his possession a flying saucer or parts thereof. Gave me a little bit of idea where it came from, and ranch northwest of Roswell. Then stated that Major Marcel, Jesse Marcel, who was our base intelligence officer, was going to fly it to Fort Worth to turn it over to General Roger Ramey, who was commanding general of the 8th Air Force at that time in Fort Worth.
And what did Colonel Blanchard want you to do?
He told me to prepare a release with basically the information that he gave me over the phone. When it was done, to take it into community and hand deliver it to the 4 news media we had in Roswell at that time, which is what I did.
Lydia Sleppy worked at KOAT in Albuquerque in 1947. After the press release announcing the recovery of the flying disc was released, they attempted to put it on the wire service. Little did she know that they were in violation of some of the strictest security codes at that time. Lydia Sleppy describes.
And he told me he had something hot for the networks. I got into it enough to know that it was a pretty big story when, if you wanted an interruption on this teletype, if you wanted the operator to stop, or you needed, to feed something in, there was a signal bell that you turned on. And this bell came on and the typing came across, this is the FBI, you will immediately cease transmitting.
Judge Roberts was a reporter at KGFL in 1947. He remembers receiving numerous phone calls pertaining to the wire recording they had made of the rancher Mac Brazel describing the event. Phone calls relating threats as to their broadcasting that report. Judd Roberts still remembers.
I don't know whether I should say this or not, but it was true. We hid out the rancher for one night.
Where were they?
Yeah.
Where?
Yes, and we did some transcriptions with him and so forth. Good old wire recorders, if you will.
Where did you hide him out?
We had him out at Mr. Whitmore's house here in town. He lived outside of the city limits on the east side.
So you were present at the actual interview?
I was not.
You were not, right?
I was trying to run the station at that time. The question that we ran into is the very next morning, some friendly person, probably from Clinton Anderson's office, called us from Washington and said, we understand that you have some information, and we want to assure you that if you release it on this matter, because it's not supposed to be released, it's very possible that your license could be in jeopardy, and so we suggest that you not do it. And he said, when I mean in jeopardy, like maybe 3 days.
That wire recording of Mac Brazel was confiscated by the military. Mac Brazel himself would then be taken to the base, where he would be detained for the next 7 days. He later would complain to neighbors that he was asked the same questions over and over again, that he felt as though he were in jail, and that he was escorted through town, not only to the radio stations but to the newspapers, retracting his original story. Frank Joyce, the first reporter to actually speak with Brazel, remembers how Brazel came to the radio station and would now tell a different story.
I think the next significant thing, as far as I'm concerned, it was dark. I got a phone call again. It's Brazil, and he is saying in a very clear voice, you know, very, very loud. Well, look, this story is, you know, we haven't quite got this story right, and I don't know whether it was that night or the next night. They wanted to come over and talk to me, so I said, okay, come over to the station. And that's where I said, look, you know, it's a very interesting story, or something to that effect, and however, it's nothing at all like, or it's completely different from the story you told me on the phone the other day, especially about something, you know, the little, where I said to him, the little green men, and that's where he said, yeah, only they weren't green.
Lyman and Marion Strickland were neighbors of Mac Brazel at that time. In fact, Lyman would return home shortly after the incident and described to his wife observing Mac Brazel escorted through town by military officials. Later, they would learn from Brazel himself where he had been and why he appeared to be in the trouble he was. Marianne Strickland describes the comments that Mac Brazel made to them after returning from his detainment at the base in Roswell.
Mac was very secretive, and I know that he made it plain that he was not supposed to tell this and not supposed to tell that. And I think most of what he was not supposed to tell was that there was any excitement about this material.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's my recollection.
But Mac was pretty unhappy?
Oh, you bet. He was a man who had integrity. He definitely felt insulted and misused and disrespected.
Master Sergeant Lewis Rickett, assistant to the counterintelligence officer Sheridan Cabot, was not on the base at that time. Rather, he was on assignment down in Carlsbad. But upon returning the next morning, the morning of July 8th, Cabot suggested that he wanted his first-hand impression, not to the debris field, but rather to the impact site, a separate site that was much closer to Roswell, the site separate from the debris field, the location where the remains of the actual craft and crew were recovered. When Rickett described the half-hour drive just north of town, he said that it appeared that they had already cleaned up most of the site and that there was still some debris present. He described the debris as follows.
Got out there, they had some stop points, they had some of the military police there, and they had a number of them scattered all around, and it looked like to me that there's something they said that had landed, and there was a little particle things lying all around. And I asked Cabot, I said, what's going on? He said, well, this is what the guy said, something landed here, but he saw it when he come out here. So they had air police scattered all the way around the perimeter, and the whole thing was down below the level of the rise. It was just like a kind of depression to the, it was a natural depression. It wasn't that thing didn't cause it. It did cause a little bit, but the material that we saw, it just looked like it whatever had caused it, it was just like whatever there, it was just vaporized. Some of them were curved, some of them were flat. I know that I walked around to the other side over the distance and up to where the at that time it was the military police, the provost marshal's office, and they had kind of a semi-guard out there allowing nobody in or out, and they gathered up that stuff as far as I can remember, and I know that it was just as, it wasn't pliable, it was just as hard as it could be and just as light as a feather. And it was was enough there that they put some in a, I don't know what type, some kind of a weapons carrier, I think they called it, or a truck that the military had, and they put it in there, and the major took it. A plane came in, and this time Kevin was running the whole thing, and they left. I heard various other sources that I'm not sure about, but I do know that later on, I asked Joe Worth, who was head of the 700 CIC, and whatever happened to all that metal? He says, that, wish you wouldn't ask me that. He said, we sent it over to a lab and they don't know either.
The American Broadcasting Company and affiliated stations present Headline Edition with Taylor Grant. From all over the world, wherever the day's headlines are made, Headline Edition brings you accurate, timely reports on the news behind those headlines, plus informative in-person interviews with the men and women who made the headlines today. Today's edition presents a roundup of the latest developments in the finding of a flying disc. Stay in step with history in the making. Stay tuned to Headline Edition. And now, here's Taylor Grant.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucers. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizzell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. In the meantime, General Ramey describes the object as being of flimsy construction, almost like a box kite. He says that it was so battered that he was unable to determine whether it had a disc form, and he does not indicate its size. Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil. Other Army officials say that further information indicates that the object had a diameter of about 20 to 25 feet, and that nothing in the apparent construction indicated any capacity for speed, and that there was no evidence of a power plant. The disc also appeared too flimsy to carry a man. Now, back to Taylor Grant in New York.
There was important activity within...
First Lieutenant Robert Shirkey had been at the base in 1947 and had watched as some of the wreckage had been taken through the operations building and out onto the ramp where it was loaded into an aircraft.
The call came in one day to arrange to have B-29 ready to go as soon as possible. And of course someone asked where to. I said, just get a crew on board and have the airplane stand by, and we're going to go to Fort Worth. And that was Colonel Blanchard's directive. At any rate, I was in that operations office, and Colonel Blanchard drove up and came in and asked, is the aircraft ready? And I and one other fellow there, who was now dead, said, yes, it's sitting right out front, ready to go. And with this, he turned, stepped out back into the hallway, and waved to some people outdoors and still sitting in the automobiles. They came in the front door, straight down the hallway, and right out onto the ramp to climb into the airplane. And these were the people that were carrying parts of the crashed flying saucer at that time, UFO today, that I got to see. Colonel Blanchard, in order to get out of their way, had backed into the doorway of the ops office And I stepped up to him and I said, "Colonel, turn sideways. I want to see too." Maybe if I hadn't said that to him, made it obvious that I was there, I would not have been shipped out 2 weeks later. So he just turned and looked at me, and he did turn sideways so that I could half step into the doorway and watch the fellows go through. And thus I saw them carrying certain pieces of these metals, brushed stainless steel. Maybe if you think of a common aluminum foil roll today, when you're pulling out, one side's real reflective, but that's not what it was. It was like the opposite side, which is rather dull. I've heard it mentioned now, of course, so many times about the I-beam with the markings on it and so forth. And I actually saw that piece of I-beam being carried through and saw the markings.
Upon orders from Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force at Fort Worth, Texas, the commanding office of the 509th, Marcel was to bring some of the material to his attention at Fort Worth. According to Robert Porter, a crewman on that flight, there were only 4 small packages. They had checked the aircraft, a B-29, and then a staff car from building 1034, which brought the material out and loaded it onto the plane.
We flew these pieces. They told us it was parts of the flying saucer, and we flew from Roswell to Fort Worth. And we started out, they told us we'd be going to Wright-Patterson in Ohio. And we got to Fort Worth, and they transferred them to B-25 and took them on to Wright-Patterson.
And what did you do then?
Then we returned to Roswell.
Okay. Who do you recall was on board that B-29 when you left Roswell?
Colonel Jennings was on board, and Colonel Barraclaw, Major Wunderlich, and Major Marcel was ones up front.
Okay. And who was it who told you that these were pieces of a flying saucer?
I don't remember just who it was, but it must have been Captain Henderson.
What was it that was actually loaded on board that you saw?
Well, we had it's just packages and wrapping paper, and one of them was triangle shaped, about 2.5 feet across the bottom, and the rest were in smaller packages, about shoebox size.
What was your feeling when you?
Well, just like picked up an empty package.
Is that right?
Right.
Very light.
Right.
Colonel Thomas Jefferson DuBose was General Ramey's chief of staff at Fort Worth in 1947. He would receive a phone call from the Pentagon, directly from General Clements McMullen, instructing them to switch the actual material, to substitute a very common radar reflector kite suspended from a weather balloon.
There's no doubt in your mind, I gather, that the balloon story was a cover story.
Absolutely none. We knew that it was a cover story, and if, whose idea it was, I haven't the vaguest idea, but we used that in order to assuage the curiosity of the press, because this had gotten out in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Dallas News, and the UPI. And
well, the press release from Roswell, Blanchard's press release.
Yeah, there are all these pictures from Roswell. You see, all this created a lot of hubbub, and 8th Air Force headquarters had to be the hub, the guys that they're going to ask. The president, somebody along the line is going to say, who's running this show? And it comes up to the 8th Air Force, Ramey or his chief of staff. Somebody in there has got to know something about it.
The B-29 transported actual wreckage and debris directly to Wright Field. Wright Field at that time was the headquarters of the Foreign Technology Division. Foreign Technology did all the reverse engineering of captured weaponry from World War II. Then Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Exon was with the Foreign Technology branch. He remembered the material coming in. He also remembered the reaction of the boys in the lab, as he put it, and their conclusions after examining the material.
As a result of that, I know they saw the one sighting, and then there was where a good bit of the information came down, and then there was another location where there was apparently the main body of the spacecraft was, where they did say that there were bodies there, and you know, I've been in. I've gotten several information, and I think it may be more rumor than fact, about what happened to those bodies, although they were all found and apparently outside of the craft itself, but were in fairly good condition. In other words, they weren't broken up a lot.
And they came into Wright-Patterson.
Well, that's my information, but one of them was that it went to the mortuary outfit. At that time, I think was in Denver or someplace where these people were being identified. But the strongest information was that they were brought into Wright-Patterson. Whatever happened to the metal residue, and I imagine it's still in the archive someplace. But back in that 47 time period, everybody was, you know, what did happen and why wasn't there more information, and who kept the lid on it? Well, I know that from the time the sighting happened, it went to General Ramey, who is now deceased, was at Carswell Air Force Base, and he, along with the people out at Roswell, decided to change the story while they got their act together, got the information into the Pentagon and into the President. And of course, President Truman and Joan Spots, Secretary of the Defense, who has now passed away, and other people that were close to him were the ones that made up the key investigating team in relation to this information. And one of my officers who was done some research, who worked for me at Wright-Patterson, who had done some research in this as part of his school, came up with the deal that there was great concern at that time, and I'm afraid that the national people would panic if the sketchy information they had is from what was it, where did they come from, what was the mission, and so on got out. So they decided to make it a national cover-up project, and that there probably wouldn't be much released until everybody that was involved in it, including the people I'm talking about, and their immediate staff, made up the first 12 people that made up the investigating teams, had passed away, so that they wouldn't divulge information, or information wouldn't come out, so that they may or may not have been involved while they were still alive.
Back at the impact site, Sergeant Melvin E. Brown and another MP were stationed behind an ambulance truck with orders not to look inside. His daughter, Beverly Bean, remembers.
It's almost as if when he'd actually told the story, he wished he hadn't. All available men were grabbed. That's his actual words I'm saying here now that I can remember. All available men were grabbed. They all had to go out to the desert where a crashed saucer had come down. And they all had to stand guard duty around this site. They were told to look, but not look, not to take anything in. He lifted up, him and this other guy both lifted up the cover and saw, I say 2 bodies, but my sister remembers him as saying 3. We disagree on that. They saw these bodies, and they were about 4 foot tall, no more than that, maybe even less. Much larger heads than we have, slanted eyes, yellowish skin.
Local mortician Glenn Dennis worked at the Ballard Funeral Home at that time. The very afternoon the bodies were being recovered from the impact site just north of town, he received one of the most unusual phone calls he would ever remember. It was the mortuary officer from the base hospital. His question: how soon could they ship out the smallest caskets they had available? And could they be hermetically sealed?
Then the next call I got, probably in 30, 45 minutes later, he was asking me then about our preparations and what we did, preparing the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, or that, some badly decomposed bodies, or how we treated the burnt bodies, otherwise very traumatic cases, and what our procedure was on that. Then the next question was, well, what would you do where you wouldn't change any of the chemical contents, you wouldn't destroy any of the blood, you wouldn't destroy anything that might be very important later on, down the road? What would your process and what you do and the chemicals that you use, would that change the blood contents and everything? I knew at the time that there was something that probably happened. I thought maybe it was something that they weren't ready to release, or that might be some VIP or something they didn't want. But I had no idea what it was. But I told him at the time, I said, I can come out and I can help you if you have that. And he said, no, this is for future, in case this should happen in the future. He said, this is something we need to know so we'll know how to proceed.
The phone calls continued to puzzle Dennis throughout the afternoon, to say the least. He would then have an opportunity to go check out for himself. It was taking an injured serviceman out to the base hospital and driving to the rear of the building that he observed some unusual material peering through the back of two open ambulance trucks.
What I noticed that was so unusual about this, that there was some inscriptions or border around this part of it. That was probably 3 inches, maybe around 3 inches, but it was kind of going along the contour of the wreckage. And at the time, after I got back, I got to thinking about this and what the border looked like, and it kind of reminded me of an Egyptian inscriptions of figures and whatever. One of the nurses, lieutenant nurses that I was acquainted with very well, she was very excited, and she said, how did you get in here? What are you doing here? And get out immediately or you're going to get in a lot of trouble. She said, get out of here as fast as you can.
No sooner than the mortician could heed the warnings of his nurse friend, he attempted to leave, but was quickly accosted by 2 armed guards who led him out down the hallway.
But I said, it looks like you've had a crash. I said, I see some debris in the ambulances there. And that's probably where I really got in trouble, right there. And he said, well, just a moment. And then he went to the door and he motioned for somebody, and about that time there was 2 MPs that came out. And he said, get this man out here, get him out here as fast as you can get him out of here. And then we were starting down the hall, and then there was a man that we heard a voice said, I'm not through with that SOB yet, said, bring him back. The captain told me, the red-headed captain told me, he said, there was no crash here, you did not see anything, and he said, you don't go into town, you don't tell anybody anything that you saw anything else. He said, if you do, you'll get in real serious trouble. Well, I was a little agitated because I didn't like the name he called me to start with. And I informed him, I said, look, I'm a civilian, you can't do a damn thing to me, and as far as I'm concerned, you can go to hell. And that was the exact words that I told him, and I remember it very clearly. And then the black sergeant, he said, oh, don't kid yourself, young man. He said, somebody be picking your bones out of the sand. She was going into this examination room that was across the hall. She was going in to get some supplies, and when she walked in the door, there was 2 doctors there. And she noticed a horrible smell immediately. But she saw these 2 doctors, and they said, we need you. She started out the door and said, you stay here, we've got to have you. And what it was, they were examining, she told me, 3 bodies, foreign bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. I knew she was almost in a state of shock because she was said it was so gruesome and so horrible, and she would just, almost grab her head and it looked like she was just going into total shock. She had drawn me just a little the night before. She had a description of an arm that was that she had drawn, and then the anatomy of the arm, which was different from ours. There was only 4 fingers on the hand. Didn't have a thumb to it. Only 4 very slim, fragile little fingers. But when they turned one of the hands over, they noticed at the end of the fingers there was little pads on each one of the 4 fingers there. And it looked to them like they were like little suction cups. They were little hollowed out areas that looked kind of like a suction cup. The heads on these individuals were much larger, somewhat larger than the human head would be. The eyes were very sunken. The nose was there wasn't a convex or anything. The nose was very concave with only 2 little orifices. The ears, there was no ear. There only might be 2 little orifices on the side, but very small little lobes that looked like they might function, they might close maybe or whatever, but they was very small. Nothing resembled an ear on a human anatomy at all.
The Marcel flight wasn't the only one. In the days that followed, other crews flew material out of Roswell. Captain O.W. Pappy Henderson flew a C-54 load of wreckage onto Wright Field. He kept that flight a secret from everyone, including his wife Sappho, until the early 1980s. Then, after seeing an article in a tabloid, he told her exactly what he saw.
We were in the grocery store in San Diego, where we had lived for many years, and we were at the checkout stand, and here was a paper, the Globe, I believe it was. Here was all of the story about it. In fact, I still have the papers here. And he said, he took a look, and he said, I've been wanting to tell you about this for years. I guess if they're putting in the papers now, it's no longer a top secret. And he said, he bought the papers, and we went to the car, and he said, read those. And I read the article, and he said, it's a true story. He said, not only did I know about it, but I'm the pilot that took the crashed saucer to Dayton, Ohio. I was astonished, and if it hadn't been Pappy telling me, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But he was very confident, and he was always very truthful and straightforward. So I believed him. But in those days, if you said you'd seen a spacecraft or a flying saucer, you were put in the annals of a nut. So we didn't say much about this. But years before, when people would ask him what he thought about flying saucers, his answer was, there's something to it.
Pappy Henderson, after seeing an article about the Roswell crash in 1982, mentioned the bodies to his daughter, Mary Catherine Grood. He told her a little more about them.
What I remember him telling me was that they were small people. I don't remember 3 feet high, but certainly shorter than we were. Small people, pale, slightly slanted eyes, sort of larger heads, and humanoid looking, humanesque looking, but not like us, different from us. And he said they were dead, and that he had seen them, and that he had flown the wreckage of this flying saucer.
Pappy Henderson told a close personal friend and fellow military officer, Dr. John Kromschroeder, about the bodies in early 1978.
Produced this piece of metal for me to look at. He said, what do I think of it? He said, well, it's different. And I felt it, and it did feel different. And I studied it some. I was able to determine that it's the metal structure was different than alloys like we have in our aircraft, for instance. And of course, he did preface his question by stating this was from this craft. Apparently, I think it was a case of appropriation that he acquired this, for future study, perhaps.
Porter's flight to Fort Worth with a small sample of the material, and Henderson's special flight to Wright Field were the only aircraft dispatched. Like Henderson, other members of the first transport were involved in moving wreckage from Roswell to other locations. Robert E. Smith was a sergeant with the first air transport in July of 1947. According to him, he spent one day loading crates, which were loaded onto 3 C-54s.
My involvement was to help load the crates of the debris onto the aircraft.
Did you see what they were crating of?
All I saw was a little piece of material, about so big square. And you could crumple it up, let it out, and it would come out flat. And you could not crease it. One of the guys that was in on the crating and so forth had picked up a piece, slipped it in his pocket. And where he is now, I don't know. Now, when I spoke with you on the phone, I mentioned about a distant cousin of mine that was with the Secret Service. And we talked at length. And I asked him, I said, where would they take something like that? He said, most likely Los Alamos. All of our secret stuff goes to Los Alamos.
You didn't have any first-hand knowledge of this event, though?
He was there.
At Roswell?
Yes, he came as more or less a representative of President Truman.
Did you see him at Roswell?
He saw me.
But he didn't speak to you then?
No.
Did you discuss the specifics about what went on at Roswell with him in 72?
Well, some things. In other words, he asked what outfit I was with. And I told him, I said, first ATU. He says, oh, you guys blew it out. Backyard gossip at the UFO or something of that sort. He kind of grinned, he says, yeah.
From first-hand testimony, we now know that there were 2 separate body flights that went out the early morning of July 6th. One directly to Andrews Army Airfield in Washington, the other to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. According to Staff Sergeant Robert A. Slusher, one of the crewmen on a B-29, they would later fly out a special flight on July 9th.
It was July 9th, 1947, and we left Roswell with a crate, and we flew it to Fort Worth, Caldwell Air Force Base in Fort Worth.
What were you told was in the crate?
Actually, when we left, we didn't know. No, we didn't know that in the crate that there was probably something classified really till we got back, and the kind of the rumors started talking around, and we did get a little flack as far as that we had taken something probably, and they were joking about it to us, but on the way back we realized it was something classified, and that they didn't want us to talk about. We boarded the plane in the 393rd area, see, right off of the operations really, and taxied down to the area where we picked up the crate, and there were MPs on there. I remember the MPs.
Now you say MPs on there, on the flight? Were they armed?
Yes. Had the old standard 45.
And one member of your crew make any comments after you returned back to Roswell, as far as considering the rumors at that time? Did anyone say anything more definite that you can recall?
One of the gunners said that Lieutenant Martucci had said that we had made history.
According to Slusher and other members of that crew, Major Marcel was on the return flight from Fort Worth back to Roswell. There, Marcel was told not to say a word. In fact, he would then tell his family, who he had earlier presented some of the actual material to, that they should never say another word about the event.
It was definitely not a weather balloon, and it was an aircraft. So what it could have been, I wouldn't know. I still don't know.
Major Edwin Easley was the provost marshal at Roswell in 1947. he was in charge of all military security at the impact site. Up to the moment he died, he still swore to us that he was unable to freely talk about the event. In other words, he had taken an oath of secrecy that he took to his deathbed.
And I understand you were the provost marshal at one time.
That's right.
At the 509th.
Yes.
During July of 1947?
Well?
Pardon me?
Yes.
Yes. You're aware of the incident that took place there in July of 47? The alleged crash of a flying saucer?
I've heard about it.
Do you have any first-hand knowledge of it?
Do what?
Do you have any first-hand knowledge of the incident?
I can't talk about it.
Then you do have some first-hand knowledge?
I can't talk about it.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Well, we have received information from a couple of people that you had been out at the crash site yourself as a provost marshal. So that was what we were trying to confirm. But you can't talk about it, right?
That's right.
Can you tell me if you were at the crash site?
I can't talk about it. I told you that.
Yes, sir, I understand.
I've been sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you that.
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to talk about it.
After the balloon explanation, Roswell quickly faded into obscurity. There was no mention of it again. Personnel at the base were instructed never to say a word any longer about the case. And yet months after the event, Mac Brazo's son, Bill Jr., after heavy rainfalls, would ride out through that particular debris field site and occasionally would find a scrap of material. He now describes what he found.
He said that's what the Air Force tried to make him believe, that it was a weather balloon. He said, Bill, he said, it was not a weather balloon. He said, I don't know what it was. But he said it was something altogether different and much bigger. And I was talking about it. I went into Corona and I was sitting there in a beer joint, and of course, my friends was asking me if I'd found any more or anything like this, and I said, well, I'd picked up a few scraps, about a cigar box full, and somebody, I don't know, must have informed the Air Force, because first thing I know, I have visitors, and they say they'd like to have this material. And they didn't tell me they'd confiscate it. They just said, well, like we're going to have it one way or the other, you know.
For the next 30 years, the story would lie dormant. Only rumors would occasionally circulate about the military possession of an actual flying saucer and its crew. Not until 1977, when Major Jesse Marcel broke his silence, went public, and then told the world about the true nature of what had happened at Roswell.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was. There were just fragments strewn all over the area, an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide. So we proceeded to pick up the parts. A lot of it had a lot of little members with symbols that, to me, I call them hieroglyphics because I could not interpret them, could not be read. They were just like symbols of something that meant something. These little members could not be broken, could not be burned. I even tried to burn that, would not burn. See, that stuff weighs nothing. It's not any thicker than tinfoil in a pack of cigarettes. See, I tried to bend this stuff. He says, it will not bend. He says, we did all we could to bend it. It would not bend. He says, we even tried making a dent in it with a 16-pound sledgehammer. He says, still no dent in it.
On September 8th, 1994, the Air Force released its final statement through the Pentagon on the Roswell incident. They admitted they had lied and covered up the original incident. In reality, according to the Air Force report, it was nothing more than Project Mogul, a top-secret acoustic listening program to detect the Soviet detonation of their own first atomic bomb. The problem with the report is that the particular launch in question was scrubbed. Launch number 4, comprised of nothing more than a cluster of neoprene rubber balloons and radar reflector kites, the very same balloon that is originally pictured in General Ramey's office that was splashed across the country in many newspapers. So in essence, all they have done is redesign the weather balloon. With the release of its recent report, the United States Air Force has made it clear that the official government posture regarding Roswell shall remain that of unyielding secrecy, that great efforts shall be taken to discredit and debunk any and all attempts to prove that the crash was anything more than a weather balloon, and that by issuing their final report on the matter, the Air Force and all other government agencies hereby wash their hands of all responsibility to further answer to public demands. We are convinced that Roswell is perhaps the single best documented case implicating the United States military with long-term suppression of the truth. After 6 years of intensive research, 500 witnesses have come forward, over 100 of them retired military personnel who directly or indirectly participated in either the recovery or cover-up. Many who have gone public have stated unequivocally that Roswell was indeed the recovery of an extraterrestrial craft and crew. With the release of the report, the United States Air Force has once again attempted to bury the evidence with misinformation and media manipulation. We believe we have amassed enough evidence substantiating the claims of the witnesses. You have heard the witnesses present their case. It is now up to you to listen and to decide who indeed is telling the truth.